Not every extinction report is final. Time and again, it turns out that some species, once believed to be completely gone, suddenly reappear. In this compelling video, we take a closer look at 6 fascinating animals that are officially considered extinct. But various clues, recent discoveries, or even exciting rediscoveries strongly suggest they might not have entirely disappeared completely. And the final example truly shows how even established science can sometimes be wrong. 6. The Tarpan. The Tarpan was a European wild horse that existed until the 19th century. It lived in Eastern Europe and Russia. It was smaller than modern horses, sturdily built, and lived semi-wild in steppes and forested areas. The last officially documented Tarpan died in 1909 in a zoo in Ukraine. However, for decades afterward, reports accumulated about wild horses with an unusually primitive appearance, small heads, short manes, and gray-brown coats. Evidence especially came from regions like the primeval Białowieża forest or the Hungarian Puszta. Starting in the 20th century, breeders, particularly the Heck brothers in Germany, began backcrossing using robust local breeds. From this, the so-called Heck horse emerged, which closely resembles the original in its outward appearance. In Poland and the Netherlands, these animals now live in semi-wild conditions for landscape management. It is unclear whether a true tarpan has survived anywhere. However, genetic studies show that some populations in Eastern Europe carry wild-type DNA characteristics. Perhaps the tarpan no longer exists as a species, but a part of it still roams the forests of Europe. Number 5. The Falkland Islands wolf. The Falkland Islands wolf, also called warrah, was the only land mammal of the Falkland Islands. It was officially declared extinct in 1876 after being systematically and relentlessly hunted on both main islands. However, precisely how a fox ultimately made its way to the remote and isolated Falkland Islands remains a profound mystery to this very day. Fossil evidence indicates that it was already living there long before humans arrived. The most widely accepted theory? It originated from a population that migrated via frozen sea routes. In Patagonia, on the Argentine mainland, there are foxes with a surprisingly similar genetic profile, especially the pampas jackal. Some researchers consider it possible that the warrah originally developed there and then became isolated. There have been no confirmed sightings after 1876, but genetic comparisons with Patagonia and old travel accounts strongly suggest that the story of the warrah is more complex than previously thought. Perhaps it did not disappear, but simply continued in another form, invisible in the DNA of its relatives. Number 4. Carolina parakeet. The Carolina parakeet was the only parrot that inhabited large areas of the United States. It lived in large flocks in forests and swampy areas. It was colorful, with a green body, yellow head, and red face, and was notably sociable. Due to deforestation, being hunted as a pest, and the introduction of diseases, the population declined rapidly. In 1918, the last wild specimen died, and between 1918 and 1919, the last ones in captivity. However, time and again, isolated reports emerge from remote regions of the southern United States, such as Louisiana, Georgia, or Florida, about colorful parrots with unusual behaviors. Even audio recordings from the 1930s are considered by some prominent researchers as compelling evidence, although definitive and conclusive proof is still notably lacking. However, the bird's highly conspicuous behavior and truly striking appearance make it incredibly hard to overlook any potential survivors, unless they happen to live in very small, isolated groups within deep and largely inaccessible swamps. Perhaps one still sings somewhere, only now it's been more than 100 years. Number 3. The truly ancient New Guinea Highland Wild Dog. For decades, it was considered extinct. These elusive, medium-sized dogs, with their upright ears and golden fur, were last seen in the 1970s. After that, there was no further evidence of their existence. It wasn't until 2012 that a possible recording was obtained. In 2016, a research team set up camera traps in the remote Puncak Jaya region and captured images of at least 15 individuals, well-fed, living in isolation, and displaying the typical morphology. Genetic analyses have clearly shown that these particular dogs belong to an extremely primitive and ancient lineage, being more closely related to the wild Australian dingoes than to typical domestic dogs. Today, they are considered the most direct descendants of the prehistoric dogs of Oceania. Their survival was made possible by the isolation of the New Guinea Highlands, which are largely protected from human influence by steep mountains and dense rainforests. This example impressively demonstrates that some animals have not disappeared. We have simply stopped looking for them. Number 2. The Dodo. The dodo is probably the best-known symbol of extinction. This flightless bird lived exclusively on Mauritius and disappeared at the end of the 17th century. This was likely due to hunting, the introduction of foreign animals, and habitat loss. However, reports of strange bird species in remote parts of the island continued until the 18th century. Even in the 18th century, some historical records clearly mention large, rather strange birds in hard-to-reach, isolated regions, even many decades after the very last official sighting. Recent comprehensive genetic analyses of preserved remains conclusively show that the dodo has very close biological relatives among current, existing pigeon species. Some biologists do not rule out the possibility that subspecies or hybrid forms resembling the dodo may have survived in remote areas. Although there are no reliable sightings in the modern era, interest in a possible genetic recreation is on the rise. And some researchers point out that an animal that was never photographed is much harder to verify definitively, both in life and in its extinction. 1. The Coelacanth. For many decades, the Coelacanth was a prime and compelling example of extinct fish species. Cretaceous fossils strongly suggest that it completely disappeared 65 million years ago, at precisely the same time as the dinosaurs. But in 1938, a diligent researcher pulled a living coelacanth from the deep sea off the coast of South Africa. The discovery caused a great stir in the scientific community. Since then, many more specimens have been successfully captured or filmed in the vast Indian Ocean, especially around the Comoros, Indonesia, and Mozambique. The coelacanth lives at depths between 150 and 700 meters in underwater caves. Its remarkably slow metabolism, cartilaginous fins, and distinctive primitive overall body structure make it truly unique. Scientifically, it is referred to as a living fossil. Its discovery was a shock, proof that vertebrates can survive for millions of years,